Hi everybody, it's Honest John again. Now, about 8 months ago, my landlady decided to make the building that I live in here, this apartment building, a non-smoking building. Now I have a lease, and it says I can't smoke in the hallways and I can't smoke in the common areas, but it doesn't mention my apartment. So legally, technically, if I want to, I can smoke in here. But I thought to myself, this isn't really worth fighting about. My right to smoke, if I have to go outside and smoke, I'll smoke a little less. So and I knew that if I defied her, then there would be all kinds of hassles. So why fight? So for the most part, I do go outside and smoke. So day before yesterday, I was out having a cigarette, and all of a sudden this guy who lives in the building, somebody that I don't know hardly at all, but we say hi when we pass in the hallways. He came basically stumbling out the door, and he was leaning against the building, holding on to the wall to keep himself from falling down. Now, like I said, I barely know the guy, but I had seen him walking around before, and he always walked without any problem. So I figured maybe he'd hurt his leg or something, and I walked up to ask him if he was okay. And he looked at me and he started crying. And he said that his leg was fine, but that he didn't know what was wrong with him, but that he couldn't remember anything, and he was confused, and he was really scared. And he said that he'd been stuck in his apartment for a week because he couldn't figure out how to put on his clothes. That's how confused he was. So I'm not a doctor, but it's pretty obvious that either he'd had a stroke or maybe fallen down and banged his head, but that he was suffering from some kind of traumatic brain injury. So I asked him if he wanted me to call an ambulance, but he became very agitated and said no, that he couldn't afford an ambulance and he didn't have any insurance, he couldn't go to a hospital. And at that point, I really wanted to say, he's a grown man, he can take care of himself, and go back up to my apartment. But I knew that he really couldn't take care of himself. I knew that if I left him, something bad was going to happen. If he just wandered down the street past the building, he might not be able to find his way back. If he walked back into his apartment, he might never come out. So even though all I wanted to do was come back up to my room here and take a nap, because I had a gig that night, I knew I couldn't do that. I could have called an ambulance and then when they got here tried to convince him to get in it, but I doubt that he would have, and you can't force a guy to get into an ambulance. So I told him to stay where he was, and I went and got my phone and I got my car, which, by the way, I really hate to give up the parking space. We don't have any parking here in the building, so we all have to park out on the street, and it's a battle for survival. But I went and got my car, and I got him to get into my car, and I took him to County General Hospital. And when I got there, since he doesn't remember the names of his relatives, I'm his emergency contact number now. I left my name and number with the hospital, and so I really hope that nothing goes on that they feel like they need to contact me, because I'm certainly not in any position to make decisions for him. And hopefully he will get well enough to be discharged, and if that happens, I'm probably going to be the one that has to go pick him up. So I kind of went from being a complete stranger to the most important person in his life, reluctantly. And the staff at the hospital, when they found out what the situation was, they were really praising me for taking care of him and getting him to the hospital. But I knew, I didn't tell them this, but I knew that I really wasn't doing it for him. I was doing it for me. Because I knew this was a life or death situation. And it'd be on my conscience if I had just left him where he was. So, yeah, it was nice of me to help him out. But there really wasn't any choice if I wanted to be able to sleep at night. Thanks for listening.